Hello, this is Michael Lindsay today from the Christian Construction Podcast, inviting you to stay tuned today as we discuss this important subject of jealousy. All right, well, it's good to be back with you here today on the podcast. Brother Keith, hope you're doing well.
I'm doing good. How are you doing?
Doing wonderful.
Might have to move this chair.
Yeah, move your chair. I don't care. Brother Matt, how are you doing?
I'm doing good.
Amen. Praise the Lord. And we're continuing on, as best we know anyway. We are continuing with our drive-in services here at Love Valley, Lord's Blessing. And we want to encourage you, continue to be faithful to your church and the work of God that you're in. And do what you can do. A lot of things that we can't do right now. Matter of fact, we're probably not even supposed to sit at this table together. And so there's a lot of things we can't do. But what we can do is we can let our light shine during these times. These are uncertain times. These are days.
Well, if it'd be, you ever watch, ESPN, they'll have those, the debates with, they're in 3 different locations. We'll get us
They're probably all in the same room, though.
We'll get us a podcast. Looks like we're in 3 different areas. And basically just
we could
break the lines down here.
But we do want to encourage you. Continue to be faithful to the Lord. If ever there was a time when we ought to be letting our light shine, it would be in days like today. We mentioned it just a few weeks ago. This is a time that our generation and generations before us have not experienced. All of this is new to us. The quarantining and the drive-in church and the depending solely on live stream. This is new to us. So there's a lot of things that we cannot do. But in the meantime, we need to take advantage of the things that we can do. And so be encouraged and continue to be faithful and do those things that you can do to let your light shine before men during these dark days. We want to remind you also, this is a ministry of the Love Valley Baptist Church. Our pastor is Barry Philbeck. We thank him and our church for affording us this opportunity to be able to present this ministry and this work here. Hope it is a blessing to you, and we do thank you for tuning in. And want to remind you also to watch our friends over at the Higher Grounds podcast as they put out episodes every week. And then devotionals every day. We hope they're a blessing to you from the gang at Higher Grounds Podcast. Well, today we are going to discuss the subject of jealousy. I want to read just a couple of verses as a means of introduction. The Bible says in Proverbs chapter number 23, the question of what is jealousy, or how is a person jealous? Well, Proverbs 23:7 says, "For as he thinketh in his heart, so is he." So as a person thinks, what they think about, what they meditate upon, those things that they are allowing to have place in their life, what it is that they're thinking about all the time, that's who they really are.
Yeah.
Our pastor has said before, who you are is not necessarily the person we see, it's who you are on the inside. When nobody's looking, when you won't get caught, when you know that you can do whatever you want to do, and that's who you really are. And so if a person, they can be all different kinds of things on the outside, but if on the inside they're full of envy and bitterness and wrath and malice and jealousy, that's who they really are. 1 Corinthians chapter number 13 and verse number 4, the Bible's in the description of charity, it says that charity suffereth long and is kind. Charity envieth not. The best I can tell, that word envy and jealousy, although they are not the exact same, they're very similar. They're coupled together oftentimes in Scripture.
Sure.
And so charity, if a person is being charitable, or if they are full of charity, if they're living a life of charity, then they will not be jealous. They will not have envy rising up in their life. And so today we want to talk to you about the subject of jealousy. Song of Solomon chapter 8 verse 6 says this, Set me as a seal upon thine heart, as a seal upon thine arm, for love is strong as death. Jealousy is cruel as the grave." And boy, that is the truth. Jealousy is it's a subject. It is a topic that much needed to discuss and to maybe clear the air about, and if I could just say it this way, to deal with it. Parents have to deal with it with their children. Pastors have to deal with it in their church. If you're in the workplace, a supervisor, a lot of times he has to deal with jealousy in the workplace, and so there's jealousy everywhere. I want to give, just as a way of introduction, what are things that people are jealous of? I have some notes written here. People are jealous of possessions, the things that you have, the things that other people have. We can be jealous of those things. We can be jealous of a position because so-and-so is elevated above us, or because they have a better position, be it in the home, be it in the workplace, be it in the ministry, be it at church. People can be jealous of a position, but then people can be jealous of a personality. And I think we've all been here, maybe at a time of discouragement, or at a time when you had some uncertainty in your life. Here comes so-and-so, and boy, I wish I had their personality.
Let me tell you what happened to me last night. Check out what I just bought.
Yeah, they're that person that it seems like everything goes their way, or they've always got the right word to say. Yeah. And instead of being thankful and asking God, I'd like to have that spirit, or I'd like to have that attitude, or I'd like to have those character qualities, instead of that, we get jealous. Sure. We get envy. And I don't think it would be a stretch to say, you young men are in a church where we have multiple young preachers. At the time I first come to Love Valley, there were multiple young preachers. One of the things that you find as a young preacher in a church with other young preachers is a spirit of jealousy. I'm not going to speak for y'all, but I know that there were times as a young preacher in a church full of other young preachers that you'd have to fight off. Well, pastor used him to do this, or he used him to do that. And it's not a sin if that thought crosses your mind. I don't think that's a sin. I think it's a sin when you dwell on it. Sure. When you allow it to kind of absorb, and then you're thinking about it all the time, and the next thing you know, that spirit of jealousy comes over you. And so in the ministry, it's easy to be jealous of other preachers, of people. So what are some of the things, Brother Matt, what are some of the things I mentioned? Possessions, personality, position. What are things that you associate with jealousy, as far as things that people are jealous of?
Well, I mean, you got physical things. Everybody likes to have things. Everybody wants things. But beyond that, I think a lot of it's opportunity.
Yes.
You were talking about that, in the church. There'll be things that, a lot of times we look at it as just a happenstance thing. But the majority of the time, when things happen to other people, it's because they've put themselves in the place for it to happen to them.
Absolutely.
When something good goes their way, when something bad comes our way, their way, whatever happens, the majority of the time, a lot of times we give too much credit to Satan. And we say, well, the devil's really been on me. He's been fighting me. Well, most of the time it's because we put ourselves in that situation.
Yes.
It's because we put ourselves in that place. And we become jealous because of our own actions. We didn't put ourselves in the place that we could obtain that.
Absolutely,
we didn't put ourselves in the place that we could live the life that they're living, the ministry that they're in, whatever you want to take.
That's right.
I was thinking from the outset, I guess, a statement that I wanted to make, and I was going to make it here early in the podcast, is the fact that jealousy is not a sin. And you can prove that very simply. Deuteronomy chapter number 4, verse 24, for the Lord thy God is a consuming fire, even a jealous God. Yep. We know that God can't sin. Therefore, if God can't sin and he's a jealous God, then jealousy is not a sin. But we brought up that word envy.
Yes.
That's, I believe, the difference between the two. It's almost like, you see the outside of somebody, but you can't see the inside.
Right.
It's almost the same way. You look at jealousy and envy on the outside, many times they look the same. But the issue is at the heart of each. At no point throughout the Bible will you find where jealousy is considered a sin or something that could, affect you with God. But when it becomes that envy and the actions of that jealousy, the statement was made, and I don't remember exactly who it was, but I thought it was good, and it brought remembrance to my mind today as we were studying for the podcast. I heard someone say jealousy is when you hold on to it, but envying is therefore you can control it. But envying is when you give it to somebody else and let them control you. Basically, when you got that jealousy, if you say you're not jealous, well, you got a problem with sin, or you got a problem with lying. At some point in time in each and every one of our lives, we're going to be jealous of somebody. We're going to want something that somebody else has got. We're going to it's just human nature. But when the jealousy, we've got to be able to control that. We've got to be able to subdue that. The sin that comes into our lives when we give ourselves over to that object, that position, that person, that personality, the things you were talking about, when we give ourselves over to it and let it control us, and that produces sin in our life.
Yes, that's right. Galatians 5, verse 19, now the works of the flesh are manifest, which are these. It goes on to say in verse 21, envyings. And so there again, that word envy, it seems to be the sinful side of
right.
Through the New Testament, when the word jealousy is used, it's always using the positive, that God is jealous, that Paul was jealous over his people. It seems to be used in the positive manner, but the negative form of that, if I could say it that way, the negative form of it would be envying. And so it's a work of the flesh. So God cannot be in this being envious of others. He doesn't want us to live a life where we're walking around being jealous of other people and being envious of other people, if I can say it that way. Brother Keith, what's maybe some things you have to say as far as something to add? What are some things that people are jealous of? Things that you can be jealous or envious of?
As soon as we started thinking about doing this podcast, I thought, jealousy. I'm like Matt. Jealousy in itself, I believe everybody has some form of jealousy about them. But when it gets to a driving force, and that is the envying, I believe it's pride in somebody in a person's life. Somebody will say, "Well, I'm not getting what I deserve, what I ought to deserve, so I'm envious."
We'll take it by force.
Yes, yep. It's a form of pride. Jealousy and envying is a form of pride in our lives, and I'm not sure that there's an area of our lives that is safe from feeling envious toward. Your clothes, your job, I'm not married, but your spouse. There's I don't believe that it could be something very petty as appearance, but I don't believe that there is anything safe from another person being envious of that.
That's right. Romans chapter 1, famous chapter. Got some verses in there. That's, of course, the chapter that where Paul said, "For I'm not ashamed of the gospel of Christ, for it is the power of God and salvation to everyone that believeth, to the Jew first, and also to the Greek." But then it goes on to give us I guess you could say, the characteristics or the steps of a person that becomes reprobate. And one of the things that I've always found interesting is when God is talking about turning people over to a reprobate mind, the types of sins that are mentioned in there. And there in the middle of it is this interesting sin of envy. We see in Romans 1, verse 29, it talks about, let me start verse 28. "And even as they did not like to retain God in their knowledge, God gave them over to a reprobate mind to do these things which are not convenient." And then he begins to give a rundown. And so he's saying a person that God has turned them over to a reprobate mind, this is what their life is full of. And he goes on to give the list. Backbiters, verse 29, "Being filled with all unrighteousness, fornication, wickedness, covetousness, maliciousness, full of envy, murder, debate, deceit, malignity, whispers, backbiters, haters of God," all these things. And then, but that word envy, a person that is the characteristic, if I could just say it this way, it is a characteristic of a person that God has turned their mind into a reprobate, that they would be full of envy. And so when we live a life being full of envy and being jealous in a bad way of other people and of their things and their position or what have you, we are displaying the characteristics of a reprobate.
Yeah.
It is not the behavior, it is not a natural behavior of a believer to be full of envy. And so what are we doing in doing that? Well, we're giving glory to the devil in our life. It is as if we are bowing down before Satan himself and we're giving him glory. Why? Because what we're doing is sinful and we're
That's right.
taking glory away from God. And everything we're doing is a work of the flesh. It is these are sins that reprobates commit, that they're guilty of.
yeah.
And so we find that there in Romans chapter number 1. Let me say this. There are different places where jealousy is found. There is no end to this list that we could give. Jealousy or envy is found. It's found in families. We could go through the life of Joseph. His brothers were full of envy. They were so full of envy. What did that lead to? It led to them lying on him. Why? All because they were full of envy. And we know that God was in control and that it wasn't that God made these things happen, but God knew that it was going to happen. And in the midst of that, God used all of that. They meant it for evil. Joseph said it in Genesis, I think, 49 or 50. He said, you meant it for evil, but God meant it unto good. And so that envy was found, though, where it all of the lying and the throwing him in a pit and the pretending that he died and then going back to their daddy and lying and all that stuff, where did it all start at? It started with them being envious. Yeah. That's where it all started at. Jealousy is found in families there. And then jealousy is found in politics, 1 Samuel 18. I mean, is there a better example of how jealousy doesn't just get to somebody, but it got to the person who had the highest position, politically speaking, in the land, as a man named Saul, who had so become overwhelmed with this sin of envy and jealousy that he was trying to kill the person that delivered them.
Right.
The one that helped preserve his throne, the one that helped save his kingdom.
Yeah.
He has turned on him. He's turned on him. And so I think that's...
It was driving him.
it was driving him. That's exactly right.
Talk about how, jealousy can become envy. I don't think it would have been a sin if they would have come back in and the women were singing the praises. We know the text.
Yes.
Saul hath killed his thousands, David killed his 10,000s. I don't believe it would have been a sin if Saul would have said, man, I wish they would do that for me. But it's what he acted upon that, what it became of that jealousy. It wasn't simply jealousy in our life. We were talking about that, it not being a sin. What we should do with it is use it as a driving force for good. For good.
Like if you were envious of a person's lifestyle and their family life.
Right.
I want that for my family.
How am I going to get that?
And that's why I said I believe every person has some form of jealousy about them. You don't have the drive. You have no incentive.
It probably, the whole story could have been different if Saul would have said, man, that's great. David delivered our people. David done great things, but man, it really would be cool if I could do that for myself. If I done something like that and used it to figure out a way to accomplish it himself. What he wanted to do was to eliminate the competition, eliminate the rivalry, and to exalt himself, to make it what he's already done look better instead of doing better himself.
Right. Think about this. The best we can tell, and I might be wrong, I'll go back and reread it and apologize later, but the only evidence we have of what could have caused Saul to become jealous was hearing what those people had said.
Yeah.
And, of course, it doesn't help that it was women. I'm sorry, ladies. But, I mean, in all honesty, when you read through that text, it wasn't that he killed Goliath. Everybody's rejoicing. At that point, Saul's not jealous. It wasn't that, we made the lights go off. We got to move or something. There we go. It wasn't that, we got sensors on these lights. It wasn't that just that he killed Goliath. It wasn't just that he had performed the task. It wasn't just that they had now won the battle. It's that those women said what they said. I guess two things could be said. Number one, be careful, in praising somebody too much. You might because of their weakness, it might give them an opportunity to sin. As I don't want to blame those women, but I guess it would be a lesson that we could learn personally of being careful not to praise people too much. And then, but then ultimately, those things are going to happen. Saul had the opportunity to respond however he wanted to. And so that tells me that you've got an opportunity. It is all on Saul to respond right to that. And the best we can tell, that is the only thing in the story.
That's an amazing thought. I had never thought about it that way. When Saul admitted in 1 Samuel, 17, 1 Samuel 17, admitted that he didn't have an answer for Goliath. David comes on the scene, and he gives David his armor, and he goes and conquers the giant, and he answers it by giving him his daughter.
Sure. So he's okay with it up to
his
this point.
response is great until people start talking about it.
Yeah.
And then people say something about it, and that's when it gets into his mind. The warfare from his eyesight, he conquered. But the warfare got into his mind, and it conquered him. It
wasn't the war on the outside that got him. It was the war on the inside.
Right.
Right. We've talked about that before. Well, jealousy is found in families. It's found in politics. It's found in churches. You go to 1 Corinthians chapter number 1. We find it in there. Let me just turn over there real quickly. 1 Corinthians chapter number 1. And, of course, Paul would say, I think in 2 Corinthians, he'd say, I'm jealous over you with a godly jealousy. 1 Corinthians chapter number 1, verse number 10. Now I beseech you, brethren, by the name of our Lord Jesus Christ, that ye all speak the same thing, and that there be no divisions among you, but that ye be perfectly joined together in the same mind and in the same judgment. Let me stop right there. When people are not in the same mind, and they're not in the same mentality, and they're not all headed in the same direction, what happens? There's a divided house. There's jealousy, there's envy that settles in. He says, for it hath been declared unto me of you, my brethren, by them which are of the house of Chloe, that there are contentions among you. Then he goes on to say, he goes on to say in verse number, let me just go to verse number 12. Now this I say, that every one of you saith, I am of Paul, and I of Apollos, and I of Cephas, and I of Christ. Is Christ divided? Was Paul crucified for you, or were you baptized in the name of Paul? I thank God that I baptized none of you, but Crispus and Gaius, lest any should say that I had baptized in mine own name. And I baptized also the household of Stephanus. Besides, I know not whether I baptized any other. For Christ sent me not to baptize, but to preach the gospel, but not with wisdom of words, lest the cross of Christ should be made of none effect. All of this that's going on in the story, it is all the result of envy. Yeah. It is all a result of the sin of envy and jealousy. It had gotten the best of them. And so jealousy, we see it in families, in politics, but it gets in the church. And most of the time, once it gets in the church, it'll go through the church until it gets dealt with. And hate to say it, but the pastor will be the one that usually has to deal with it and take care of it. Jealousy separates people, separates people from God. It becomes the master of your life. And there's a few things we could talk about. I'm gonna turn it over to Matt here in just a minute. I think he's got a great scriptural example of a man who had the right attitude. If we could have said somebody could have gotten jealous, he's going to deal with it here in just a second. But while he's getting there, how can a person be delivered from jealousy or from envy? Admit you have a problem. Confess that to God, and then just be obedient to the Scriptures. Again, 1 Corinthians 13 tells us that charity envieth not. Yeah. And so with that being said, Brother Matt, you were discussing that with me the other day. You were talking about a good example of somebody who didn't get jealous. If anybody had a right to, or you figured they would have, it might would have been in the text that you're about to read.
So many times, I kind of, the reason this I guess, picture of someone who could have got jealous and used what could have happened the right way. The reason this text means so much to me is, I've dealt with jealousy, as we all have, and I would say this is the jealousy that I've probably dealt with the most, and it's of other people. And a lot of times, Brother Keith, Brother Michael, we've all I don't know. I still consider you a young preacher, brother.
I am.
Me
I'll
and-
be
me and Brother
38
Keith-
here in a few weeks, but
nobody
I am.
else might, but we still consider you a young preacher. But it's very easy, incredibly easy as a young preacher.
Sure. Yes.
You know, to suffer with jealousy of others that are many times in the same place as you, the same position as you, the same really desires as you. You know,
Yeah.
you want the same things. You want to be in the same position or ministry or things come into your life, and you know, a lot of times one may get to do this, one may get to do that, and it's real easy to say, man, you know, I'm just going to quit. I'm going to give up. I'm going, you know, because I didn't get what I wanted.
Yeah.
And someone in the Bible that, you know, I guess you kind of got to read in the white, that I try to picture in that instance is Caleb. You know, the first time that we see Caleb, he's mentioned in the same text as another man named Joshua.
Sure.
And we know the story. They come to the other side of the river from Jericho. They sent the 12 spies. 10 of them went, said, you know, we ain't got no chance. We ain't got no shot. They're going to wipe us out. There's giants over there. But Joshua and Caleb come back fired up, saying, you know, we can do this. The Lord's on our side. We can accomplish this. And from then on until the book of Joshua begins, you always hear those two together, Joshua and Caleb, Joshua and Caleb. And I can see myself, you know, in Caleb and Joshua's life, you know, that we have men, we have friends in the ministry that the truth of the matter is should be nothing but support and should be nothing but a help to us, but we make them of little use in our life because we allow jealousy to become envy of them.
Yep.
You know, they'll take the next step. We know what happens. Moses comes off the scene, and the leadership of Israel is put in the hands of Joshua.
Sure.
And it would have been real easy. I'm just reading in the white here and trying to imagine Caleb's mindset and putting myself in Caleb's footsteps. It would have been real easy to say, well, I done everything Joshua did. You know, I said we could accomplish it. I was here when we fought all these battles. I done everything Joshua did. Why does he get to be the leader of the land of Israel? And I get nothing. Now, we know that, you know, I get, what is it, chapter 14, 15 of Joshua. You know, give me this mountain.
Give me the mountain, yeah.
And the Lord gives him the mountain city of refuge. And he really does. He gets a lot in the end. But I believe there was probably a crossroads in his mind that you could find in the white of Deuteronomy 31, where it's been given to Joshua, the mindset of Caleb saying, you know, I really did do everything Joshua did. There's nothing there's no reason that I'm not getting it. And he had to make a choice to either say, well, I'm just done with all this fighting. I'm done with all this serving God stuff because I'm not. You can't tell me that Caleb didn't desire to have what Joshua ended up getting. If if he's God's man, if he's any count, anybody with any grit in their crawl would have had a desire, you know, to receive what Joshua got.
That's right.
And looking at putting myself there, I would have wanted it too. And it would have been real easy for him to say, man, if I ain't going to get that, then I'm just going to quit all of it. Yeah. You know, if I ain't going to get what I want, then I'm just going to give up. But what did he do? He submitted himself to Joshua.
Right. That's right.
How difficult, many times, if we're honest with ourselves, that would have been really difficult for a lot of us to do, is to submit ourselves to the authority of someone that was on our same level, was in our same position, and got what we wanted. It would have been very easy for us to say, well, I ain't submitting myself to him.
Yeah.
I'm not going to listen to him, do what he asks, follow this man.
Yeah.
And but we find a man who dealt with it and handled it, I believe, as biblically as he could, and submitted himself to that man. And Joshua became his leader, and Caleb ended up becoming his right man,
That's right.
right hand man. And in the end, though he didn't see, maybe it would have been easier if in the end of Deuteronomy the Lord would have said, "Well, one of these days, Caleb, I'm gonna give you this," but he didn't know that.
No.
He had no idea.
Wasn't until
He
later
was
on.
still faithful and didn't allow that jealousy to become envy in his life, and submitted himself. And as they say, the rest is history.
That's right. You think about one of the things that somewhere in there, like you said, Caleb had to realize God's got a plan for Joshua's life, but God's got a separate plan for my life. If God wanted me to be Joshua, He'd made me to be Joshua.
Yeah.
And I think that's where, as a young preacher, that's hard when you're comparing yourself. Well, this preacher got to pastor at this age, or he went full time in the ministry at this age. And when you start,
he gets to preach out this much.
He gets to preach.
He gets
Yeah.
to do this for the pastor.
That's right.
A lot of things come up in your mind.
you cannot be effective in the ministry constantly comparing yourself to others. That will lead to a spirit of jealousy and envy in your life. Caleb somewhere had to realize, and I think he did. I mean, if he ever was jealous, we don't read about it. And that's the way our lives ought to be. If there is
Right.
an opportunity,
That's a good. Thought.
if it ever comes up, we ought to be so.
Shouldn't nobody else know about it?
No, yeah, shouldn't nobody else know about it. We ought to be so close to God and want to stay right with God that if it ever does creep up, we deal with it immediately, dismiss it, and then keep going for God and don't let it be a hindrance to us. I think,
Right.
would be the right way to, Caleb somewhere had to do that, and that's what
Yeah.
we'll have to do, Brother Keith.
You talked about what jealousy is in a person, or envying, and I thought about that. I have it wrote down that Proverbs 14, I think it's 30. Let's see. A sound heart is a life of the flesh, but envy is the rottenness of the bones.
In
There's
other words, it'll eat you from the inside
yeah,
out.
that's it. That's it. A couple quotes. Brother Michael's about to close this thing out.
No,
but,
I was fixing to ask you to give those.
There's a couple quotes that I looked up.
There's some rich ones over here.
That's rich. Put that on a
There's-
coffee mug,
There's
Rich.
somebody else's.
Or Josh Montgomery's. No, they're not.
Jealousy was behind the first sin in heaven and on earth. Jealousy is a form of hatred built upon insecurity. And then
Wait a second. That is absolute gold. Jealousy is a form of hatred built on insecurity. A person that is full of jealousy and envy towards others has some serious insecurity
I wouldn't be
issues.
surprised if Brother Rackley said that.
He probably did. Somebody check his Twitter account. That's a Rackleyism if I ever heard. All right, go ahead, Brother Keith.
just one last verse, James 3, verse number 16. The Bible says, "For where envying and strife is, there is confusion and every evil work."
There's no better person to quote than a Bible person. So that's a pretty good quote to end with. Oh, good old James. You know what Martin Luther said about the book of James, don't you? He said, this for all the people that love Martin Luther. He said that the book of James would be best used to kindle a fire on a frosty morning. So Martin Luther, we don't,
I was wondering. Where
I
you
don't
was going with that.
I don't really care for Martin Luther myself. So I
about to say,
really
we-
didn't care for him
we're
after
gonna-
I read that
We're
statement.
gonna put a Martin Luther quote on here. That's,
No, nobody named Martin Luther. Or we don't care for Martin
we might need
Luther's
to cut
quotes
that part
about.
out, Brother Gabe.
We don't care for Martin Luther's quotes about the Book of James. I'm just what I'm getting at. And
That
so
kind of ruins it for the rest of it.
I
too.
don't. I don't really know if I care much for any of Martin Luther's quotes after hearing
I
him
might
say
have
that.
until then.
Yeah, I don't want to hear nothing he's got to say. That's for all you people that put confidence in people like that. All right. Anyway. All right.
Well,
That's a good way to close out the podcast today.
We set that airplane
Yeah,
on a
yeah.
nosedive.
Right in the ocean, son. Sully ain't bringing that one back. Oh, Lordy. Well, we appreciate you tuning in and putting up with us. We do like to have fun, cut up a little bit. But I hope that the subject, I think a very needed subject, you don't hear many people talk about it. Honestly, don't hear many preachers preach about it except in passing. Maybe something said be a blessing, encouragement to you. Be sure to go to our Facebook page or YouTube, whatever means you're watching it. Like, subscribe, share, review, comment, whatever, on whatever platform that you're doing it on. And so we thank you and we appreciate all of that that you do and watching and commenting and all of that and pass it along to the next person. But we thank you for tuning in. And then we hope you'll tune in again next week here on the Christian Construction Podcast.